Hi everyone, my name is Casey Astrology. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm an astrologer. I make astrology, cards of truth, and human design videos, so welcome. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing mental projectors and human design, and I'll be looking at the human design chart of a prolific Canadian writer named Alice Munro, who happens to be a mental projector in human design. If you're unfamiliar with Alice's work, I'll give you a brief background. Alice was a Canadian short story writer who became one of the most celebrated and decorated Canadian authors in history. She won many awards in literature throughout her career, including the Governor General's Award 3 times, the Giller Prize 2 times, and the Man Booker International Prize and the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2013. Alice Munro was considered a pioneer in short story writing because she was able to bring as much depth, wisdom, and precision to every story as most novelists brought to a lifetime of novels. Because of this, her work has been described as having revolutionized the short story. Alice Munro's groundbreaking series focused largely on life in rural Canada from a woman's perspective. Because of this spotlight that she was able to shine using her short stories on Canadian women, womanhood, death, relationships, aging, and themes associated with the counterculture of the 1960s, she's actually considered a national treasure of Canada in the literacy scene. And as a short story writer, she's been compared to Anton Chekhov and John Cheever in her writing style. So for all of Alice's life, her name was synonymous with the greatest and most talented Canadian authors, and she really did build a reputation for herself as a celebrated pioneer of short story writing. In fact, she was considered the short story writer of Canada. And so this is the Alice Munro that the literary world knew and the collective knew as well in the public eye. When she was alive, her career accolades defined her, and her reputation as a brilliant Canadian writer remained unblemished. However, as many of you who have clicked on this video may know, this all changed once Alice Munro passed away. This is because about a month after her death, a scandalous, long-hidden family secret was brought to light that has cast a shadow over Alice Munro's storied legacy and brought controversy to her otherwise unblemished writing career. So Alice passed away in May of 2024 at the age of 92, and it was reported that she had been living with Alzheimer's for at least 12 years before her death. About a month after Alice's death, her youngest daughter, Andrea Skinner, published an essay in the Toronto Star revealing that she was sexually abused by her stepfather in the 1970s. Andrea shared that she did not inform her mother of the abuse until years later as an adult in 1992. After learning of the abuse, Alice separated from her husband for a few months, but ultimately went back to him. According to Andrea, her mother Alice had said that she had been told too late and loved her husband too much and wanted to stay with him. In 2002, Andrea cut off contact with her mother, and a few years after that, in 2005, her stepfather pleaded guilty to sexual assault and received a suspended sentence and probation. Alice Munro's other family members continued regular contact with Alice and her husband, while Andrea became estranged from her entire family until after her mother's death. Now, having learned all this about Alice and doing my own research on her life, I became curious about her human design chart and found out that she is a mental projector type in human design. So in today's video, I'll be discussing how being a mental projector in human design influenced the way that Alice Munro made decisions and her decision-making process and the actions that she took. So what is a mental projector in human design, and what does it mean to have no inner authority? The most important thing to understand about being a mental projector is what it is to be a projector in the first place, and it has to do with your aura. Projectors have a focused and absorbing aura unlike any of the other types in human design. This is a penetrating and focused aura, an aura that burrows right into the other person. And the projector at their very best is a projector who is one who is with another human being, who is one-on-one with another human being. It is when all of the potential of the projector's gifts to be recognized and to recognize in the other to be a guide, it's when this gift emerges in their life. That happens when they're one-on-one with another person. And the way in which Alice Munro was able to use her gift as a projector and her one-on-one aura was to be recognized and guide others as a novelist and through her short story writing. So picking up an Alice Munro novel and reading it from cover to cover completely catapults you into her world, and it gives you the full depth of her mind and the depths of its melancholy. All of Alice's stories had a heaviness to them which encompassed deep themes of sadness and strong themes of melancholy within them. And most of the characters in her stories were deeply flawed in this way. And where this sadness and melancholy was coming from was actually her own mind. Alice Munro had only two defined centers in her chart, the head center and the ajna center. The head center is a pressure center which gives the pressure to think about things, and it's the pressure to know the answer to things. And it often puts pressure on individuals to think about things that don't actually matter. In Alice Munro's case, she has the channel 6124 of awareness. This is the design of a thinker because this channel was completely red in her chart. It means that this was a channel that was unconscious for her. So she had no control over how this channel manifested through her body. This was a design channel, essentially. And so what was happening with Alice and her thoughts is that she took in the opinions and beliefs of others objectively and would form her own theories to the mysteries and problems in her life as well as the world. But at the end of the day, her body was putting this constant, unrelenting pressure on her to think and to rationalize everything. And when someone has this channel defined and they are a projector, they are invited by others to think about things and to think about events in their lives and basically to replay those events over and over and over and over again. Their mind puts this pressure on them to rationalize these events and always constantly be thinking, why? Why did this happen to me? What could I have done differently to have changed this sequence of events? What did I do to cause this event to occur? Could I have put a stop to it? Would it have changed things if I knew this piece of information sooner? Would it have changed things if I had done just one thing differently? And so on and so on. So they can get stuck in this mental loop of replaying events that their minds are focused on over and over and over again with no reprieve. And so this can be quite a debilitating channel mentally because it requires so much mental energy to be constantly thinking these thoughts and falling into repetitive mental loops, especially when the person who has this full channel gets initiated by another person to think about why, or to think about the why of their decisions, why something happened the way it did, why did they choose to make that decision. This question of why forces someone like Alice Munro with the 6124 to try and intellectualize events and thoughts in order to make them into coherent sequences rather than just allowing the thoughts to come and go and play in the recesses of her mind but not dwell on them. It was when Alice Munro tried to control her thoughts and beliefs and try to make others understand her decisions by rationalizing them and trying to argue her beliefs and get others to see her in a positive way, that it will have been no help to her. Alice had an open throat center, but she would have spoke in absolutes. When she made statements such as, I believe this to be true, or I know, because as a mental projector, Alice Munro isn't designed to get permission for the decisions which she makes. Mental projectors, unlike manifestors, manifesting generators, and generators, don't have an inner authority to help them make decisions. All they have is their mind. So the way that mental projectors make big decisions is that they need to take whatever is going on in their mind and say it out loud to at least 3 different people to get a sense of what they're thinking about a situation and what decision they need to lean towards. This is called the soundboard method. One of the dilemmas for mental projectors is the fact that they have no inner authority. So it is essential for them to be able to create a pattern by which they move through concepts. And those concepts are rooted in decision making. And that method for mental projectors is creating a sounding board outside of themselves and the outside of the recesses of their own mind or their own head. So as to hear themselves speak about the situation with at least 3 other people, as I mentioned. And by doing this, they can then make sense of what they're actually feeling about a decision that needs to be made and the way that they are leaning in that decision-making process. So for example, in Alice's case, she is a mental projector, and all projectors need to be invited to make a decision. So Alice was invited to think about a truth that had been revealed to her by her daughter. And this was a long-held secret from Alice that she suddenly was made aware of by her daughter Andrea. So the invitation that was made to Alice was to think about taking decisive action against her husband for his deplorable past actions. So it was an invitation to think about a decision which would involve Alice basically changing her entire life. So going from her normal, everyday, routine existence to complete chaos, essentially. So it was an invitation to think about choosing between her loyalty to her youngest adult daughter or her loyalty to her husband, essentially. So what Andrea did was she provided this external invitation for Alice as a mental projector to think about making a huge decision regarding her family dynamics that would require her to cut family ties and get separated from her husband. So this was something considerable to think about for Alice, and huge life decisions would need to be made. And again, the way that projectors make life decisions correctly is for them to be invited to do so. So it's through receiving an invitation from another. Now, something important to note about Alice Munro's human design chart is that she has a completely open solar plexus. The solar plexus governs the emotional system, and when one has it completely open, that brings not knowing what to feel. So we live in a solar plexus dominated world. 51% of humanity has a defined solar plexus, according to Rahu, the founder of human design. And so we live in a world where there's no truth in the now, and we live in a world that operates in an emotional wave that goes up and down, a world of hope and pain. And this is essentially the nature of our world that we live in. And the emotional system has enormous power in human design. The solar plexus has just simply enormous power. And it basically colors in the nature of the plane that we live on through emotion. And so having this solar plexus completely open for Alice, this brought into her life not knowing what to feel, essentially. This gave her an enormous dilemma because it made her incredibly vulnerable to other people's emotions and not knowing how to interpret the wave itself or to interpret the emotions themselves. So what this brings when someone has a completely open solar plexus like this is they become disconnected from feeling. And so Alice didn't have any of the keys that are there in the emotional system. So she didn't really know when to desire. She didn't know when to be sensitive to other people. She didn't know when to avoid conflict or to deal with conflict. She didn't know when or if the avoidance of confrontation may lead to truth. She didn't really know any of those things because she quite literally had this openness within her that made it so she didn't know what to feel, ever. And again, this is true of anyone who has an open solar plexus. It gives this not knowing what to feel. And it's not that the feeling isn't there in the sense that the energy hasn't come into the solar plexus. It's there. It's just that those with the open solar plexus, they just don't know what to make of it, and they just don't know what to do with it. It's completely foreign to them, and it can feel like a mystery that they cannot solve. And it can feel like other people are dumping their emotions onto the person with the open solar plexus, but because their center is open, it's actually amplifying those emotions. So for someone like Alice, having to face such conflict and uncertainty at the same time, not knowing what to do with these emotions, emotions that she seemingly would have felt had been dumped on her by another, by her daughter, by perhaps her family members who had failed to let her in on what had happened to her daughter as a child. This will have made her stomach feel poisoned and in knots, and any confrontation would have brought with it this fear of repercussions and backlash for speaking her truth. And the same can be said for facing the truths that had been going on around her that she had obviously missed because she was so focused on her own career, like her writing career. Often people with open solar plexus who are living in their not self may have secret lives because they don't want the world to see them for fear of backlash and repercussions, or for simply living their truth. It's kind of like, it reminds me of this lyric that's in this famous song called Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls, which goes, "And I don't want the world to see me because I don't think that they'd understand." It's sort of like that for people with an open solar plexus. They can be very guarded about their true nature. And in Alice's case, she has an undefined G center as well. But her undefined G center isn't completely open like her solar plexus is. There's actually one defined gate there, which is the gate 15. So she has it through the lens of her hanging gate 15. So basically, Alice had this fierce need to guard her identity as a professional writer and novelist, because gate 15 is this gate of bringing the material into form. So given what we know about Alice Munro's human design, the fact that she's a mental projector with 6124, the channel of the thinker, an open solar plexus, she also has an undefined sacral center, an undefined spleen, an undefined root, as well as an undefined heart center. Essentially, everything under her defined head and ajna center is undefined in Alice Munro's chart, and that's what makes her a mental projector. And so, given what we know, all these things, the way that Alice would have processed the news that her daughter was assaulted as a child by her own husband is that she probably would have automatically attempted to intellectualize the news, just because, again, she has this 6124 channel of the thinker. And that was just the way that her body processed information and made decisions in the not self, because, again, she's a thinker. So Alice was born a thinker, and that was the nature of her body graph. So she would have naturally disconnected from feeling the emotional trauma because of her open solar plexus. So she wouldn't have been feeling, she would have disconnected from feeling the emotional trauma that her daughter Andrea was carrying as a result of the assault that she suffered as a child, or the assaults, I should say. Alice would have been disconnected from that due to her having this open solar plex. And so having learned this news from Andrea, Alice most likely would have been invited to think about enforcing the repercussions, because again, she was a projector and a mental projector, and they need to be invited to make decisions in their life, huge life decisions. So Andrea probably would have given Alice an invitation, probably in the form of an ultimatum. Either, you lose your husband as a family member, or you lose me as a family member. So pick one of us. You need to choose. It probably would have been something like that, in the way that it was presented to Alice. What's more valuable to you, your husband who betrayed your trust and assaulted your child, or your youngest, now adult daughter, So in order to accept that invitation and to make a decision about what to do, Alice, remember, has no inner authority to help her make decisions. All that she has is her mind, really, as a mental projector. And again, correctness for a projector is obviously all about invitation and to be invited. Yet with a mental projector, that moment of them receiving the invitation, it can't be answered mentally. Not in the moment, at least. It can't be answered mentally at all. And again, there's this technique, which I mentioned earlier, and it's a mechanism that permits the mental projector to be able to make those decisions that are actually correct for it. And it's called the sounding board. So this is one of those classic moments in which, as a mental projector, when you're given this huge decision, or invitation, invited to make this huge decision in your life, basically what you need to do is contact others, and you need to hear yourself talk about it. And it doesn't matter in essence what the other thinks or says. What matters is that you have that auric connection with the other, and in that auric connection you can listen to what you have to say about it. And this is something that needs to happen during an ordinary conversation or in a casual moment. So for example, in Alice's case, she may have had to have the conversation of, my daughter revealed something to me about a trauma that she experienced during her childhood that completely shocked me. And she told me that she was sexually abused by my husband as a child. So she gave me an ultimatum. She asked me to choose between my relationship with her and my relationship with my husband. And I really don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about it. I'm trying to figure out. So like just casual conversation like that. Or, obviously the subject matter in this topic isn't casual by any means, but it would have to be about as casual as such a subject matter can allow. That would be the way that Alice would have been able to use this sounding board technique that all mental projectors need to use in order to suss out what they actually feel about a topic or situation, so that they can go ahead and make that decision. So this would have been her using her sounding board technique to make sense of the patterns. And it's not about doing it just once. It's actually about having to do it several times with different people, different beings. And it's always one-on-one, because just simply saying it to one person wouldn't have been enough. It would have to be part of ordinary or normal conversation with at least 3 people one-on-one. Because each time that Alice would have connected to another person, it would have given her the opportunity to hear herself and hear herself talk about it. And each time that she talked about it, Alice will have noticed certain things, either that she was shifting in her own perspective, or that she was shifting in her feeling about it, or that there was beginning to be a certain consistency in the way in which she discussed it with the other. And it's out of this that she would have ultimately made her decision. A decision then that is based on what Alice herself was good at. So recognition. Basically, you need to recognize in your own expression what ultimately is your truth for mental projectors, and ultimately what gives you the power to make a decision correctly as yourself. And so, according to Andrea Skinner, her mother, Alice Munro's initial response to the news of her childhood abuse at the hand of her mother's husband was to separate from her husband for a few weeks and move into her condo in Vancouver. And when Andrea visited there, here's what she revealed was said by Alice. And this was taken from an article published in the New Yorker. So she believed my father made us keep the secret in order to humiliate her, Andrea wrote. She then told me about other children that Fremlin, which is Alice's husband, had friendships with, emphasizing her own sense that she personally had been betrayed. And although it was clear Andrea found her mother's response obviously shocking, this was actually Alice's naturally bodily response to shock, and to the circumstances that she found herself in because of her exalted design sun in the gate 51.5 or 51 line 5. And this is literally the gate of shock. And so Alice had her design sun here. And people who possess this gate do end up shocking the people around them through some initiation process into a new form or a new version of themselves. So it was Alice's body's way of riding the shock and avoiding its devastation. Because remember, the design sun has to do with your body and not your personality. And so the way that it would manifest itself is not predictable. So the shocks that gate 51 brings a person feels as though they've jumped off a cliff or falling into a dark void. And the sun in gate 51 line 5 is called symmetry, and it says perfected illumination that in grasping the nature of the shock can transform its normal patterns into a symmetrical adaptation that rides the shock and avoids the devastation. So it's the perfection of the warrior ego through instinctive adaptation. And that's exactly what Alice was doing in her response to Andrea, even though it was completely shocking to everyone around her, including Andrea herself. She basically was just living her design and transmuting the shock in the way that her body knew how. So the way that, again, mental projectors make big decisions is that they need to take whatever is going on in their mind and say it out loud to at least 3 different people to get a sense of what they're thinking about a situation and what decisions they need to lean towards. And in order to make the correct decision for themselves, the mental projector needs to talk about that decision and what it could lead to, and what it would lead to and what that might be. And it needs to happen in discussion with at least 3 different people, one-on-one at 3 different times. Because again, this is the technique that permits the mental projector to be able to make those decisions that are correct for it, and it's called the sounding board. Yet with a mental projector, even when they receive the invitation to make a huge life decision, that moment of invitation can't be answered mentally in the moment. And of course, the temptation would have been there for Alice to make an immediate decision because as a mental projector, she had a totally open lower half, so no energy whatsoever. Her undefined spleen would have been under the deep temptation to act spontaneously, but of course she could not, because as of yet she wouldn't have had her clear inner authority until she spoke about it aloud again to at least 3 other people at 3 different times. Because again, the inner authority can only emerge when you begin to discuss with another person what has been offered to you and what has been presented to you. And it's important to understand when this sounding board technique discussion does happen with another person, the mental projector themselves, in using this technique, they're not seeking advice. They're not looking for the others to tell them what to do. That's not what they're doing. Basically, this can be something that gets confusing to people. The only reason that the mental projector is speaking and using this sounding board technique to others is because they need the other in order to hear themselves relative to the other person. So every other person that Alice would have encountered would have presented her with a different dynamic that she could connect to through her aura. And as a projector, she deals with the other in a very deep and direct way oracally. And so it doesn't matter, in essence, again, what the other person would have thought or said to her about her decision making or the decision that she had to make. What would have mattered was the auric connection that she made with that other person. And in that connection, she could have listened to her own voice speaking about what was being presented to her. And so we can only speculate what led to Alice's decision to separate briefly from her husband before ultimately deciding to get back together with him and save her marriage, like Andrea said, is what happened. We can only speculate based on the information that Andrea shared in her public essay about Alice's actions after her death. And we can't really get Alice's side, of course, of the story or ask her why she made this decision that she did, because obviously she's since passed away. But based on what Andrea and her other children have shared about the way Alice lived her life, it seems like she lived a very isolated existence. And it's been shared that Alice herself didn't drive, especially. So she relied on her husband, Gerald, essentially as her mode of transportation, so to drive her wherever she needed to be, and he essentially was her only sole mode of transportation, and as well as that, he was also said to be responsible for paying all of their bills and taking care of the mundane responsibilities of running their joint household, while Alice was the sole breadwinner of her entire family, it seemed. And she was focused on writing her novels and furthering her career. So this information was actually revealed by Andrea and Alice's other daughters as well. So if that was in fact the case, that Alice basically was in charge of being the breadwinner and then her husband did everything else, handled all the mundane matters, we can automatically make the assumption that Alice probably didn't have 3 separate people in her life to utilize the soundboard method with in order for her to create a pattern by which to move through concepts with and help her in decision making. And even if she did, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe she was able to get out and connect with others in this way, it likely never happened because, again, this was a huge family secret that was hidden from Alice by her family for years. And so this bombshell was not something that Alice would have felt comfortable talking about freely with another person who wasn't part of her immediate family. Because again, she did have that completely open solar plexus. and the undefined G center. So basically her entire identity was her career as a writer, and so that would have been something that she wanted to protect fiercely, and she probably would have felt threatened about revealing her true nature to other people, or her true thoughts and feelings, and her own personal truth. So it did seem like a tightly guarded secret that was not meant to get out publicly for these reasons. And again, Alice probably had no correct way of basing her decision making, and she probably lacked the sounding board when it came to this delicate topic, as well as any other, big decision that she had to make in her life, or big life decisions. And so instead of externalizing her decision-making process by sounding out her thoughts in the presence of 3 other people, which is the healthy way and the correct way for mental projectors to make big life decisions, Alice would have instead internalized this decision and made it purely mentally. And she would have intellectualized the emotions, the thoughts, and the trauma shared with her by her daughter, because again, Alice has this open solar plexus, so she herself wouldn't have known what to feel with her open solar plexus, or she wouldn't have known how to empathize with her daughter. Spontaneously in the moment, she perhaps made the decision to split from her husband due to the shock of it all. But remember, mental projections don't do well with spontaneous actions because of the openness in their spleen and root. And an open spleen is inclined to actually stay in bad relationships out of a sense of security and the fear of not being able to survive on their own without the stability or false sense of stability that a stable, albeit toxic, relationship provides them. So that's something that is very common for people who have undefined spleens, is that they'll stay in situations that are wrong for them longer than they should, solely for the fact that that situation is providing them with financial security or stability and security in their lives, and they don't want to be alone. So the key to making correct decisions for mental projectors is to consider, am I in the correct place, and does it feel right for me? And they receive sensory input from the environment around them through their open centers. So Alice Munro would have had a preferable milieu for herself based on previous homes that she's been happy in and times that she's enjoyed with people in particular places. And if she felt uncomfortable in an environment, then anything that came from being there, the people she met or the agreements she made with them, were not likely to be in her best interests. So when Alice moved from her house, when she moved out from her house with her husband and was living alone at her residence in Vancouver trying to regroup, she probably would have had a lot of time to think about and ask herself, am I in the correct place, and does it feel right for me? And we know that the answer was a resounding no, because she ultimately ended up accepting her husband's invitation to reconcile and move back in together. And it's not easy for people with outer authority or no inner authority to have to go to others in order to help them make decisions, because they may feel lost in their own lives, and ultimately they're not interested, again, in getting other people's advice. They just need to say what they're thinking out loud to a sounding board in order to conceptualize how they feel about a given situation. So mental projectors such as Alice really need a great deal of time to make correct decisions, because when they make immediate decisions like how Alice did in immediately choosing to separate from her husband, they're not putting their best interests at the forefront, because mental projectors are not meant to make spontaneous decisions. And again, it's obvious from Andrea's accounts of the events, her mother immediately reacted by moving out of her home with her husband and getting separated. So non-energy types such as mental projectors and reflectors are very deeply susceptible to the conditioning of what is out there in the world, and the conditioning of energy and the conditioning that is there in the other energy types for immediacy. And as a non-energy type, you don't want to be driven to decision making. In fact, Rahu, the founder of human design, had this to say about outer authority types such as mental projectors and reflectors. Do not be pushed by the world around you. Do not be pushed by those beings around you that want something from you now. Do not be afraid that all is lost when you reject that, because only when you're operating correctly, only then are you going to have these beings in your life who truly are correct for you. And as non-energy types, there's nothing more important for you in this life than who's there in your life. And so this is why the decision-making process for someone like Alice Munro, as a mental projector, wouldn't have been an easy one, and it wouldn't have been completely black and white in her mind or in the outside world either. And yeah, this is the reason I wanted to make this video examining Alice's design, because even though I didn't examine her entire chart in depth, I, like many other people, when she was living, was a fan of her work as a novelist, and I still have a lot of her books in my collection, and I still am a fan of her writing. So when she did pass away, and almost immediately after her death, there was this, this family secret that was supposedly revealed, and suddenly, the collective opinion of Alice became immediately about condemnation and censorship of her life's work. It all seemed very like black and white, and so by doing this video examining Alice's human design chart and what her decision-making process involved as a mental projector, I was hoping to add maybe try and add a little bit of some nuance back into the narrative about Alice Munro's life. And, this decision in particular, obviously I didn't talk about her whole life, and I don't know every decision that she ever made, but this decision or situation specifically in her life was what I was hoping to look into and examine through Alice's human design chart. It was my intention to examine the nuances of that, of her life as an accomplished writer versus her personal life. And so yeah, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. If you like this content, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to see more human design content from me. And I also have a Cards of Truth birth card playlist where I explain each birth card individually. So if you're interested in cartomancy or cardology, you can click the link to the Cards of Truth playlist at the end of this video. And I'll also link the playlist to my astrology videos as well, where I examine other celebrity charts in a similar manner to this video. And I will link my human design videos as well, where again I examine celebrity charts. So check it out and leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.